Hello, my name is Derek Scott, and I would like to share with you some of the experiences I've had over many years helping people integrate the experiences of their medicine journeys and the meanings and the learnings and the teachings into their everyday lives. I work with an understanding of the personality system, which is the internal family systems understanding developed by Richard Schwartz. This is the most accurate presentation of how the personality works as a system and how we can work with that system to integrate some of the teachings that you may receive if you are working with medicines. What led me to this? Well, in 2013, I wrote a piece on the integration of spiritual experiences. It's always been an interest of mine. And then in the fall of that year, I made a 15-minute video called Evolving Compassion, Personality and Spirituality, looking at the way the internal family systems model can be seen as a spiritual, psycho-spiritual model of being. That got the attention of some people that wanted to then work with me. So I started working with clients who were specifically using the medicine 5-MeO-DMT, also known as Soma, Jaguar, Toad. This medicine falls under the class of entheogens. En, in, theo, God, gen, forming, in God forming. So these class of medicines, they include ayahuasca, the santugaini. These are a class that purportedly bring spiritual experiences as part of their gift, if you like. I worked with these folks for many years and some of their friends, helping them to integrate these experiences. And what I noticed were there were remarkable similarities of what these folks were telling me. Some knew each other, some didn't. But I want to share some of those similarities just to see if this is helpful for you, if this is part of your journey, if it's part of your path. And I called these folks to myself Meo Mystics because they're working with 5-MeO-DMT. And their experiences are clearly mystical in what they're describing. So what do I mean by mysticism? Fair question. So I thought, well, I better look that up because I have an idea of what I mean, which I'll share with you. But I want to see what the experts say. So here's what the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy says about the wide sense of mystical experience. A purportedly supersense perceptual or subsense perceptual experience granting acquaintance of realities or states of affairs that are of a kind not accessible by way of sense perception, somatosensory modalities, or standard introspection. That's very complicated, isn't it? So I thought I'd stick with my definition. Folks tell me they go somewhere else and they get information. That's somewhere else. People variously describe as another dimension, another reality, that kind of thing. But it's somewhere else. And mystics have always gone somewhere else and continue to do so, whether it's through chanting, whether it's through fasting, whether it's through drumming, whether it's through dancing, ecstatic dance. That it's the direct apprehension of something and from somewhere. And some mystics found religions. Christ, if you like, was a mystic. He had direct apprehension of what we call the divine. Buddha was a mystic. He had direct apprehension of the non-dual state of being. Various prophets may have had direct apprehension. But the problem with those mystics and the teachings that they bring is so many folks crave that experience and they codify it into a religion, and that's where it all gets messed up. Because religions, as you know, are about power and they're about control, and that's not what the mystics are teaching. But when it becomes codified in that way, it can really be quite obscene. Here in North America right now, we're looking at the religious folks that attempted to wipe out First Nations people and have done horrendous, horrendous things to their children. In the name of a loving God, go figure. So many folks have had religious trauma of one form or another. I come to you as an abomination, according to some religious traditions. So this isn't about religion, it's about spirituality. And one thing that bugs me is when our access to spirituality is defined and delimited by people that claim to be the gatekeepers, right? The religious folk who who then determine whether or not you're worthy or good or bad or shit like that. So direct apprehension, the mystical experience, and the folks I've been working with, I like to call Meo Mystics. So let's be clear, they're using substances, right? As folks have done for thousands and thousands of years, or shamans have done for thousands and thousands of years. These are not addicts, these are seekers. Now, I've got nothing against addicts. I fully respect addicts because those are, attempts to cope with horrible experience. Fully 2/3 of people who would identify as addicts had overt abuse as children, and the other third probably had covert abuse, neglect, attachments, wounds. And they're coping, they're using substances to cope. However, that's not these folks. These folks aren't talking about using substances to cope. They're talking about seeking, they're talking about journeying. So typically, they pay attention to set and setting. The set is, what's your mindset going in? How are you doing approaching the experience? And the setting, one that is respectful of where they're going to go, respectful of the journey, gentle, beautiful, some music perhaps in the background, good friends, trusted friends. To a person, these folks describe the work with 5-MeO-DMT as sacred. They tend to open in ritual, and they support each other as a group. They tell me it's not recommended to have this experience by oneself as an individual because it's really helpful to have the support. It can be very powerful experiences, apparently. So typically one will journey at a time and others will sit and hold space. And the particular method that they're using with this medicine is to smoke it. And I'm told that there are typically 3 levels or 3 amounts of dosage. The lower one would be what some folks are calling a handshake, introduction to the medicine. Middle dose would be a hug, more intense experience. And then what's referred to as the full embrace or the initiation. I'm going to talk mostly about that experience because that's the one that folks find the most powerful and tend to need the most help with in terms of what it means and how to integrate it. So in terms of the internal family systems model, and if you're not familiar with that, there's going to be a whole bunch of links in the comments at the end. You can go to a video I made called Understanding the Personality System to start. But in terms of the internal family systems, the handshake might be what we call unblending, when the parts of us that are habitually kind of blending with us begin to fall back a little bit, begin to separate out a little bit. And when that happens, it makes more space for ourself, our core self, our true self. At a larger dose, what these folks are calling it a hug, there's the experience, so they tell me, of a kind of field of self-energy. There's a field of compassion, of love, of brightness, of clarity. And then the full embrace or the initiation, folks find this very hard to describe, which makes sense if you look at Locke Kelly's teachings, a spiritual teacher, also IFS therapist. He talks about self-essence, which is from which we arise, if you like, in the spiritual traditions, as being ineffable. You can't talk about it in words. He uses various other adjectives. There's an isness about it. It's invisible. Can't remember them all. But the point is, this is difficult to describe in words. Words are only pointers to this experience. But nonetheless, people need to use words to integrate the experience as best they can. My teacher and mentor, Dick Schwartz, who founded the internal family systems model, he talks about the boundaryless experience of oneness in which you lose a sense of being separate and meld with something oceanic. And that's his personal experience with ketamine. Nonetheless, it seems to describe what these folks that are working with 5-MeO-DMT are describing. But they also talk about it in different terms. They'll use the term bliss, love, timeless eternity. They describe a pixelation, which as far as I can determine is when the perceived reality just sort of falls away as if all the pixels are falling apart, and they drop into the experience of eternal bliss is often how it's described, or words to that effect. Dick Schwartz again says, we become non-dual in the wave state. Self is understood to have many qualities about it, and it occurs both as a particle, if you like, and as a wave. Those of you familiar with quantum physics will know that at that level of reality, if you're looking for something as a particle, it presents as a particle. If you look for it as a wave, it presents as a wave. There is no givenness to the quality of it. So our core self, in the individual, I might speak of how at my core, I'm a compassionate being, I'm kind, I'm clear, I'm courageous, lots of C words, seeking harmony. But I might also be tapping into a more general state of that. I might be, in effect, drawing on or channeling that, right? And that's this field state. That's where the sense of self, Dick uses SELF, capitals for that, is the broader wave state. Or in Buddhism, what's referred to as non-dual awareness. Now, before I go any further, if this sounds amazing and great, I'm not advocating this. I don't advocate anything. Your choices you make in your journeys, in your experiences of how you want to grow are yours. And there are cautions. I hear stories of people throwing up. It's usually referred to as getting well, not getting sick. But sometimes, whatever is in the body that doesn't need to be there gets released through throwing up. I did hear a tale of one person who went into a paranoid state and got stuck there and disappeared from the group that she was with. So there are certainly cautions with any of this, which is why I'm not recommending it. But if you are already working with this, then hopefully this video might help with some of the integration of what's happening. Again, consistently people talk about receiving certain truths. One of which is that we don't die. Now, that's not just a thought, it's not just a belief, it's not just wishful thinking, it's not couched in a religious framework which talks about eternal life. Apparently, it just comes as a clarity and a deep knowing. We don't die. That's a game changer. There's a whole bunch of social psychologists who work in the field of terror management theory, fascinating blokes. There's a video called Flight from Death, if you want to see what they're up to, but they have found ways to experimentally show that fear of death is the core fear that we carry. It's the scariest thing, is that we're going to die, we're going to be snuffed out. And they suggest that when there's different immortality systems, for example, Christianity, Muslim, and they disagree, that's threatening to whoever's got one of those immortality systems, because it means we might be wrong and maybe we're going to die. And so that's responsible for a lot of the tension in the world. Well, if that's gone from your existence, if fear of death is no longer there, that's a game changer. They also tend to report in this initiated state a sense of perfection, a sense of divinity. We are all divine. We are all aspects of the one truth, the one light, the one God, love, non-dualism. And again, Dick Schwartz's experience says that in the grand scheme of things, everything is okay. Everything is okay. Sometimes people report experiencing entities, encountering entities, malevolent entities, entities that will feed on doubt, right, that will come in and want to invalidate the experience. My colleague Bob Faulkner talks about these as unattached burdens or critters. He tells me they're quite common. Or benevolent entities, guides, reassuring guides, letting you know all is well and all shall be well. The malevolent entities that feed on doubts and fears and worries They have a history as well. One of my favorite quotes from Macbeth, those of you who are familiar with it, is when Lady Macbeth is asking to be made of steel so that she can murder King Duncan. And she says, "Oh, come ye spirits that do tend on mortal thoughts and unsex me here." So she's calling on entities to remove her femaleness, which is her softness, so that she could murder this king. So it's fairly common in Shakespeare's day to call on these entities, and it was understood that they could influence our thoughts. Many cultures understand this as well. But again, the reports here is of the direct experience of them. And more commonly in the folks that I've worked with that work with ayahuasca, that work with Sentu Daime. The encounter with these beings is very common with those particular medicines. And there are ways of working with these beings so that they don't have any purchase. Okay. So it sounds great. For those that report this, they access truth. I don't die. I'm perfect. Everything is perfect. We're all divine. How come that's hard to hang on to? Because it is. People don't leave the experience permanently transformed into that understanding of who they are in the world and how they are in the world. So what's going on? And that's where the internal family systems model is so helpful. Because if there are parts of us that believe that the world is dangerous, with good reason, we've had experience of the world being threatening. Parts of us hold that. The world is dangerous. Stay invisible. That's one way to cope. So when you sort of come back to your ordinary reality, that critical voice may come in. It's a part, it's a protective part, right? It might want to tear you down out of fear that you'll start taking risks. And if you start taking risks in an unsafe world, that's not going to be okay. If you start to realign your understanding of yourself, that you're inherently good and that you're here to serve others in a way that is aligned with your basic character, that might be considered scary. That might be grandiose. There's all sorts of reasons why that may not be allowed to be integrated. And we often see through our protective part's eyes. Right? If you've been hurt by someone of a particular body type and build, if you're out walking at some point, there'll be a part of you that will register somebody that has the same body part and build, and you'll avoid them. Completely different individual. They might be absolutely lovely. But your protector's saying, let's not go there, right? Just in case. So we tend to see the world through our protector's eyes. And when people report coming back from these expanded experiences, they may come into a more contracted place where the protective system takes over again. Dick Schwartz says we need to stay safe and homeostatic, right? We're safe in the balance of what we know, even if the balance of what we know feels diminished compared to other possibilities. And he tells us that our parts forget our wave state of connectedness and can make us forget it too. So, understanding of internal family systems is that at your core is yourself, and that self is one of inherent goodness. It exists within you in your particular, and it exists in wave form in the broader world, broader seat of consciousness that it is. People who work with the 5-MeO-DMT talk about entering another universe or another dimension. And Dick Schwartz says, could it be that by simply focusing on our parts, we can enter that same realm? When we disidentify from the parts of us holding burdens and the protective parts determining that we have to be in a particular way in the world, and we bring our attention to them, we're able to come to them from our core self, which then may be accessing some of those other qualities. Now, some of you may doubt that. Some of you may point to behaviors that you've engaged in and say, no, I'm not inherently good. Look what I did there. And I was an asshole there, and I was really unkind to somebody there. So if you notice that, that's fine. What you're referring to there is the different parts of you that have behaved in particular ways, that act in particular ways, that are protective of other parts. So if, for example, I see somebody that's really scary, And a part of me says, they're really scary, you want to avoid them. And I start to move away, and then they shout at me. They say something like, no, hey, where are you going? I was going to ask you something. That young part, usually very frightened all of a sudden, and then a protector will come up, right? And my protector will find some way to cope. Or I might run, or I might turn around and say something like, in anger, yeah, I don't have to fucking pay attention to you. Who the fuck are you anyway? And then walk off. That's one of my protective parts. It's what we call a firefighter. Later on, there'll be a part beating me up for that. Why did you say that? Maybe they just wanted to know the time. What's wrong with you? Because the frightened part is no longer present. And that critical part of me will then point to that behavior and say, see, you don't have inherent goodness. If you had inherent goodness, you wouldn't do stuff like that. But what it's missing is there was a part that was activated and another protective part was activated. And if I back off from them, I can see that. I can thank them. I can appreciate them. So if you're doubting, this notion of this core self, who you are at your core, consider this. You go out one day from wherever you live or work, you look down the street, it's a quiet street, and you see a little kid, maybe 6 or 7 years old, just sitting on the sidewalk, sobbing, no adults around. What's going on? You're probably not going to walk the other way. You're probably going to go up to them and say, hey, what's going on? Are you okay? Where are the adults? So what's happening there? You're operating out of compassion. You're seeing somebody who's vulnerable. They need help. So you step in. And then curiosity, what's going on? Well, that's at your core. And you probably didn't even have to think about it. You didn't have to think about how I'm going to respond to this sad, lonely kid by themselves. You may have had to think about it if there's a concern that, as an adult approaching a vulnerable child, what if somebody sees you and thinks that you're some creepy weirdo? And isn't that sad? Isn't that sad that we have to factor that in, those of us that do, in the world we've created? But those would be protective parts, right? Wanting to make sure that, you didn't get in trouble, you didn't get hurt. But my guess is your first instinct would be to go and help that kid out. So that's all we're talking about. That's you. That's you at your core. The IFS method helps us to operate from that place of self more often, and particularly to bring healing into the parts of us. Parts of us that hold shame. Very, very common. Right? We live in a shaming culture. You've been shamed as a child. It's a very effective form of behavior control. You do anything to avoid it. And then parts of us take it on as a belief. There must be something wrong with me. I'm flawed in some way. I'm not okay. I need to try harder. That's in direct contrast to the experience that the medicine brings of apparently sense of perfection and all being well. Now, these burdens of shame, of self-doubt, of fear, of not belonging, they get taken on usually quite young, and they need to be attended to. And we know how to do that. We can listen into those parts. We can help them to release the distressing beliefs that they have taken on. They're not innate. They're not inherent. They get taken on in response to challenging external circumstances. And because they're taken on, they can be released. And in terms of the integration of the medicine work, often these parts will get triggered. Often my clients will say, well, it was a great weekend and I loved being with my friends. And, I tapped into what felt like something really, really true for me. But then, since then, and I'd say, well, how come? How come you don't think that that's true for you? Well, I'm just, I'm nothing special. Oh, there's a part of you saying you're not something special. Okay, can we get to know that one? Where did it pick that up? Where did it learn to say that about itself? Where did it learn to say that to you? And that's what we call a trailhead. That will take you down a nice trail into wherever that part took on the false beliefs about itself that keep getting your attention until you can help it to release them. And this integration is necessary if the seeking that many people that are working with these medicines is going to bear fruit. Otherwise, it's just another spiritual bypass. It's just getting high. And if you want to get high, what you do is what you do. But evidently, these medicines for people that work with them in an integrative way are considered to be teachers. And this medicine, I'm told, is the most powerful teacher the folks I've worked with have encountered. Some of these folks have talked about receiving teachings or visions, and then a sense of purpose, a sense of greater compassion for humanity and all the suffering that we endure, and a sense of wanting to be of service. These are very spiritual values, spiritual calling, it sounds like. Dick Schwartz said, after receiving my vision of IFS, I had to work with my parts to manifest it. Because he, like many of us, had parts of, who am I? Well, where did that part learn to say that? To diminish you? And how come? Let's find out. Understanding here is that none of our parts are bad, none. They all have a positive intent. So if there's a part diminishing us, then it believes it's important to do that. Let's find out how come. Again, Dick Schwartz says, experiencing a state of pure self changes people. It sounds like this particular medicine helps facilitate that. Now, I'm told that after the initiatory experience, there's a sense of coming back from it, which is sort of like waves, apparently. And as folks come back into themselves, they enter, some folks told me they enter a working space where they're able to listen into their parts or attend to what's going on kind of in this realm, so they say, as opposed to the realms that they've been out in. Again, Dick Schwartz holds that we are sacred beings, as are our parts, as is the earth. Now, this working space, where self is the seat of consciousness and we're working with our parts, is also accessible via another class of medicines called empathogens. Those work from open heart space. MDMA, also known as Molly, 3-MMC. These all facilitate more self-energy being available, but in the less of the wave state, less of the expansive wave state, and more in the particular, in the particle state, your particular particle self, and you can access and attend to the parts in your own system using these medicines, or so I'm told from my clients. Dick talks about these in a section of his latest book called Spirituality and the Self. That's where he talks about MDMA work. And again, my clients talk about working with themselves, working with a mirror, that can help, or just attending internally. So what part of me is coming up after that recent journeying? And what does it need? What does it need? The parts of us that hold distress simply need to be witnessed with compassion by us, by you, so that they can release the distress. That's the gift of the IFS understanding of healing. And when the distress is released from the system and the protectors can relax, that's when there's more access to self-energy as both leadership. Your self is leading the system, your compassionate, kind, wise self is leading the system, and it facilitates the integration of these deeper and higher truths, should they become available to you. Again, I'm not advocating these experiences or recommending them. They're certainly not for everyone, but I hope they're helpful for the Meo Mystics. IFS, with or without medicines, offers us a path of realistic hope. When it's combined with medicine, there seems to be a balance of the journeying experience and then the integration. And what my clients have told me over the years is the journey experience takes them to the top of the mountain. When they come back, they're a little further up than they were, but they remember there's a goal in sight and they're motivated to do the work to be able to continue to move up that mountain. I no longer see individual clients, but if you're interested in a teaching day, there's a link at the end of the video. I'll be happy to set up a day where I could answer your questions, teach you more about how to work internally, give you some experience practicing doing that. I'm going to leave you with a couple of more quotes. Dick Schwartz again, peak experiences, where we're peeking into the other realities. We are indeed communing with God if you consider self to be God within us. I know God can be a trigger word, but let's substitute it with love. We are indeed communing with love if you consider self to be love within us. That might be easier to hear. And when we fail to realize our divinity, we lose access to our wisdom and perspective. Final quote I want to leave you with is from Sri Aurobindo on delight. One of the aspects of Eternal Family Systems work is play. You get to see how your parts get all kind of bent out of shape and do the things they do, and there's this delight in them. And Sri Aurobindo says, delight is the secret. Learn of pure delight, and thou shalt learn of God. What then was the commencement of the whole matter? Existence that multiplied itself for sheer delight of being and plunged into numberless trillions of forms so that it might find itself innumerably. That's the great cosmic dance of which we may be a part. And what delight we can find when we both find ourselves again and again and again, and find each other again and again and again, and find our parts again and again and again. And I hope this has been helpful. Bye for now.